this morning. I apologize. We are doing some YouTube dancing here. Hey, everybody. Mary here from Mary's Heirloom Seeds, and welcome to my weekly live chat. Let me get changed up around here because YouTube decided they're not going to let me go the way I wanted to today. So give me 1 minute or 30 seconds. We'll do some fancy dancing. They do this every now and then. And actually, the last time I went live talking about prepping for garlic, this exact same thing happened. So I shouldn't have been surprised. Hey, everybody. I am Mary from marysheirloomseeds.com, and welcome to my weekly live chat here on YouTube. So a little bit of something different today. I have been all over the place lately. It's been super fun to do different events everywhere. Hey, Michelle, thanks for joining me. And Natasha, thanks for joining me. I was in Kaufman County last week. I was in Marshall, Texas last week. I was at the East Texas State Fair in Tyler, Texas yesterday. Holy moly, I got to meet some of my actual customers all over the place. And it's awesome to see you guys here as well, but it's also to kind of get out in the community and do lots of stuff. So if you'll just give me another second, we are talking about garlic. Now, first thing before I get started is, can you hear me? Because I want to make sure my mic is not blocked this time. Super important, because you need to be able to see me and you need to be able to hear me while we discuss all things awesomeness garlic. There we go. Can you see me now? Can you hear me now? Hey, Denise, thanks for joining me as well. So my mom's here in East Texas joining me. Oh, awesome. Michelle says you can hear. Today we're going to talk about garlic. We're going to talk about things we need to know, prepping for garlic, things like that. So if you are signed up to receive my emails, I sent out an email yesterday that said we are going to start shipping out garlic, which is pretty exciting. If you pre-ordered your seed garlic, it will start to ship out first thing Monday. But it's going to be slow going because we've got lots of seed garlic to get out, and there's a lot to do. Hundreds of pounds of garlic that need to get shipped out. So first things first is understanding the difference between soft neck and hard neck garlic. If you haven't already, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. This is soft neck garlic. They all look different colors, different shades. Hard neck garlic is recommended for scratch that. Hard neck garlic is recommended for cold weather. Soft neck varieties are better for warm weather. Here in East Texas, I get that question a lot. You can plant both varieties. Hard neck varieties will produce a scape, whereas soft neck varieties are good for braiding. Super important because some of you like to braid your garlic. Now, let me get started with prepping your beds. Now, last year I did a video about fixing compacted soil. So if you grew in, we're going to go with a raised bed, for example. If you grew in a raised bed and you had issues with compacted soil, maybe you tried to grow carrots or other root crops. Hey, Tiger Lily, thanks for joining us as well. If you grew root crops and you had stunted growth, or if you just know, just by looking at your soil, you've got compacted soil, you're definitely going to do something about it to prep ahead of planting garlic. So for that, I used compost. I used coconut coir bricks, the big extra large ones we sell. And then I added Mountain Flower Root Boost and Azomite. Those are my go-to, my 4 top things that I add to compacted soil. Well, depending on what you need in your garden, but those are my go-tos because it's super important to have good fluffy soil. Hey, Joanne, thanks for joining us. If you're going to plant root crops, especially garlic, because it can be on the more heavy feeder side of different crops that we grow. So if you haven't already fixed your soil, go ahead and start doing it now, actually, this weekend or next week. The next one is to understand when to plant and how to plant. So if you are in a cooler area where you have a frost date coming up soon, you're going to want to plant sooner than some of the others, those of us in, say, East Texas, where it doesn't get frosty until November. So I've got plenty of time in East Texas before I need to plant my garlic. So I've got a solid month before I even have to think about planting garlic. So now would be a great time to prep my beds. You can see back here I've got some missing spaces. I've got a bed over here with missing spaces. I just pulled it out, getting ready for garlic. So those are some things that I need to do to prep for garlic. Today's video is talking about what we need to do to get ready for garlic, and also, if it's your first time growing garlic, understanding the different varieties, how to plant it, what it looks like, and do's and don'ts. So I actually made some notes because I could rattle all this stuff off because I could do it in my sleep, but it's sometimes nice to have a refresher to kind of give you a beginner's look at growing garlic. One common mistake that I've seen people make is to take their garlic, you get it in the mail, you're all excited, you're ready to plant it, and you peel it all off, and then you have naked garlic. You don't want to plant naked garlic. So you want to leave, you can see you've got a papery husk on it. You want to leave that papery husk on there. It gives it a little bit of a protection. Some people like to soak it in kelp meal tea before they plant it as well, and that's a great way to give it a little bit of a boost. And knowing where to plant it as well. So we already talked about compacted soil. Garlic grows in full sun. Have you ever grown garlic before? For those of you just joining me, hey Jenny as well. For those who know naked garlic, for those of you just joining me, how many of you have never grown garlic before? I would love to hear if those of you that are watching, if this is your first time, let me know. So garlic grows in full sun, and it takes patience. In order to grow a good solid garlic, we plant our garlic in fertile soil. So I want to make sure that it is fluffy and it is fertile. That's why I add compost, mountain flower root boost, and the azomite to give you a good nutrient base for it. Tiger Lily says never but interested. Well, awesome. I'm glad you're joining me. So these beds, say I'm going to use this bed here. This is not full sun right now, but throughout the day it will be full sun. So I could definitely use this raised bed. Now, if I was going to start with this raised bed, just as an example, I would want to check the soil, see if it's missing anything, and amend right now, because I've got a month ahead of me before I actually have to plant it. And then I'm going to go, okay, well, now that I have my bed ready, does it get full sun? Yes. Is it a good spot that gets well drained? You don't want it to be in, hey Melinda, you don't want it to be in a boggy area that gets waterlogged, because that is a great way to just have your garlic rot out. So you definitely don't want to do that. And then next is, do I live in a warmer climate or do I live in a colder climate? So if it is, if you get a heavy snowfall, if you have a short growing season, hardneck variety is what you want. If you don't get any snow, or you only get a light freeze or a light dusting of snow, that's where we are in East Texas, Florida, California, parts of California anyway. You want to plant softneck varieties. So that's your next one. Michelle says, I'm going to try replanting some I saved from last year that you got from Mary's Heirloom Seeds. Awesome. That is a great way. That was one of the things I talked about during my heirloom seed chat was yesterday, was that when you grow an heirloom seed or you grow it yourself and you save those seeds, you can replant them next year, and it's an endless supply. Kimberly says, well, I tried last year, didn't take, my soil was good, so I'm not sure, maybe not early enough to start roots. Yes, so I have seen people start their seed garlic in spring, and in my opinion, that's too late. So I would definitely want to make sure that I had my seed garlic available ahead of time, which is a fall. Krista says, what do you need to check your soil to see what it might need? Okay, a couple things. So I'm already growing in this bed, so I already know that it is good fertile soil. I've got tomatoes here, I've got peppers, I've got a squash plant, I've got more tomatoes over here, so I know this is fertile soil. Now, if I had issues with nutrient issues, I would definitely want to add whatever it was missing. So if I had yellowing leaves and I was lacking nitrogen, I would want to make sure I added a nitrogen supplement like blood meal. You can also have your soil tested. In my soil testing video, I mentioned how I sent my soil off to the Texas A&M Soil Laboratory. It was about $15, I think, and I paid the shipping. And then a couple weeks later, I got an email back, and I went with the most basic, because I'm not worried about any kind of, I'm not worried about any contaminants, because I've been growing in this soil and I know what I put in here. So the contaminant issue wasn't a problem. I went with the basic. I just want to know what the NPK is, and then some of the more basic nutrients. And I had good soil. They said I had a good amount of phosphorus, but I was lacking a little bit of nitrogen, which is common if I just finished growing. So with those test results, I knew that I didn't need to add more phosphorus, but I needed to add some more nitrogen. So if you're not sure, you can always have your soil tested, and it's fairly inexpensive. Now, the next thing on my list is if I'm brand new to growing garlic, I don't necessarily have to worry about it. However, if I've grown garlic before, I want to rotate my crops, because you don't want to have any kind of nutrient deficiency that it's uptaking certain nutrients and missing some. And then you also don't want to have any disease issues. So if you had any kind of soil disease that affected your garlic, you want to rotate those crops so that it's not necessarily going to affect your current garlic crop. Jenny says, my problem with soil is because it rained so much here, I had to have it treated for grubs. There's some natural ways that you can treat for grubs. Joanne says, I have grown it before many times, but always get rather small heads. What might I be doing wrong? It could be a nutrient issue. That is a common thing, is like I said, it's a heavy feeder. So if it's lacking in certain nutrients, you may have smaller heads, or it may be the variety that you're growing, because there are some varieties of garlic that grow large heads, and there are some varieties of garlic, like soft neck varieties, some of them can be on the smaller side. Off the top of my head, if I remember correctly, the Bogatir variety was a smaller variety from what I remembered, and the German red was a bigger variety. So just to throw that out there, again, I'm remembering last year's crop, so that's a possibility as well. And the next one is it's competing with other plants, or it is planted too close together. So I'm getting out of my schedule here, but that's totally fine. I posted not that long ago about how many garlic cloves you could plant in a 25-gallon grow bag, and those were planted fairly close together. If you plant too close together, they are going to compete for space and compete for nutrients, and they may be too small when they finally come out. Or if your bed is not thoroughly weeded and your garlic has to compete with the weeds, that is another reason why your garlic will be small. So there are a number of reasons that you might get smaller garlic, from the variety to competing to nutrients. So those are a lot of different factors. So that might work for you, it might not. Now let's talk about the actual anatomy of the clove and the bulb. So this is a garlic bulb, okay? So this is how it grows. And this piece here is a garlic clove. So each garlic bulb is made up of multiple cloves. Each clove will be planted to potentially produce another full bulb. So this one bulb represents probably 16 future bulbs. So, and I mix those up sometimes, so I had to be very clear when I do that. So I already mentioned in the very beginning, don't plant naked garlic. So, and by saying that, I'm going to pull this apart and show this to you. This is my clove. Actually, there's two cloves in here that if I pulled it apart, you can see it separates there. This is the base where it hits the roots, and this is what I call the pointy top. I'm using the serious terminology here. So when garlic grows, you see the root base here, and your roots are growing down, and your green shoot is coming up. So when you plant your garlic, you want to plant root side down. I want to make sure I'm not missing you guys. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to my channel as well. These little pieces, toss them in the compost. They're not trash. I'm going to toss them on the ground for now because I don't have a compost with me. So I'm going to pull this clove apart because this is multiple. I don't want to plant multiple cloves because that is, like I mentioned, a great way for them to not grow to their potential because they are going to crowd each other out. Okay, so now I have a single clove, and I'm going to plant the root piece down and the pointy part up. And I'm going to plant that 2 inches deep. I'm going to cover it with soil. I'm going to make sure the soil stays moist, and then I'm going to mulch. Mulch is another factor that a lot of people don't consider. You want to keep it mulched because, well, it's going to keep more moisture in, which is a good thing. It's going to keep some of the weeds suppressed, which is also a good thing. And if you live in an area that gets very, very cold, where you're going to have inches of snow, it's also going to protect your garlic. So these are all factors in growing garlic. Between the timing, between the fertilizer, between the watering, these are all factors in growing a healthy garlic. So any questions before I move on to the next piece? We talked about prepping your beds. We talked about crop rotation, super important. We also talked about full sun. Now I'm going live today in a semi-shady spot because it's earlier in the morning. That's partly why I'm going live at 9 a.m. instead of 5 p.m. because at 5 p.m. this is way too hot and way too sunny for me to go live here. Especially since I got poison oak last week and that was just ugly. And then again, because they're heavy feeders, if you have a nutrient issue, you want to address that before you start planting. Now, let's say you didn't address the nutrient factor, you already got planted, maybe you're watching this on the replay and you're not really sure. Krista, perfect question. That's what I was leading up to. So for those of you in Texas where it doesn't get super cold, and when I say super cold, I mean inches of snow on the ground. For those of us that live in a more moderate climate, I am going to fertilize on a regular basis. Now, Kimberly says, do you have to fertilize? And the answer to that is not necessarily. If you have good, healthy soil, you may or may not have to. I personally, in order to have the biggest, best garlic, I will use a natural compost tea once a month. And then that's all. I don't do a lot of stuff. Like I said, I use mountain flower root boost and azomite because those are good base nutrients. And then I'll use a compost tea. You can use worm tea. You can use worm castings tea, same. You can make your own compost tea just from the compost that you already have by soaking it. You can use comfrey tea. You can use kelp tea. So you can make your own where you don't have to go to the store or go to Mary's Heirloom Seeds and buy these things. But because they are heavy feeders, I do prefer to give them nutrients once a month. If you are in an area where you have lots of snow and say the snow doesn't go away until March, well, you don't need to fertilize while it's snowing. It just kind of defeats the purpose. You're just gonna have frozen fertilizer. So in that case, I would fertilize once the snow is gone, and then you want to add some compost tea or whatever you use then. Kimberly says, good to hear you have both of those. Very cool. Well, there you go. And I don't use the 20-20-20 or the 10-10-10. Those are just overkill for me. And because I know I have a solid base nutrient-wise for my garden soil, I don't necessarily have to add a ton of stuff to it. And then if you're growing in containers, it's going to be very difficult for you to grow in containers in a very cold area. You really want to plant in ground if it gets very cold. For those of us, again, Southern California, Florida, Texas, you can grow in containers. You just want to make sure you have a deep enough container because you want a good root base for your garlic and you want to be able to plant it at least 2 inches deep and add mulch on top of that. So you're going to need a deep planter. Last on my list, before I head out, I've got a lot of gardening to do, so I'm going to get to that today. Last on my list is not necessarily something you have to prepare for right now, but understanding when you're going to harvest this, because if I'm going to plant garlic in this bed, I need to know that I'm not going to be able to use this bed until late June or early July when I harvest. So it definitely takes a bit of patience. I'm going to plant these seed garlic in October, and I'm not going to harvest until June or July. So it's definitely going to need a space that is going to be undisrupted. So I don't plant other things with my garlic usually. I might plant an annual that I'm not going to pull up. I can just let it die off. I might plant some lettuce that, again, I'll just let die off, and as it decomposes, it's just going to add organic matter to my soil. But I'm definitely not going to plant like tomatoes or peppers that are going to overwhelm my bed. I want to plant some smaller stuff that's not going to take over, and again, that's not going to compete with my garlic. If I don't want weeds competing with my garlic, I don't want other heavy feeders in my garlic. So I definitely want to make sure that I'm planning ahead to plant it in a bed that isn't going to be disturbed until June or July of next year. So for those of you that may be watching the replay, if you've got any questions, you can always send me an email. My email is mary@marysheirloomseeds.com. Kimberly says, also, thanks for that. I didn't account for that last year. Yeah, and that is a common thing I get. It's like April or May, I get emails with pictures and saying, Mary, this is a single bulb. It's not actually garlic, and I harvested it. And that's because it's too early. The bulb itself hasn't had a chance to separate into multiple cloves. So that's one of those things that plan ahead. Make sure you know that it's going to take quite a while from seed to harvest to grow your garlic. So if you haven't gotten your seed garlic yet, we do have a couple of varieties available left. Once all of the pre-orders ship out, if there's a variety that's currently out of stock that you wanted, say elephant garlic or music garlic, we will have extras, and I already have a handful of people on a very short waiting list looking for more varieties that they weren't able to get for pre-orders. So send me an email. My email is mary@marysheirloomseeds.com, and I will answer, and I will put you on the list. When you're on the list, you'll get an email the day of that says, hey, it's ready. Do you want it? If not, I'm moving on to the next person, kind of thing. So definitely send me an email as soon as you can. Alrighty, everybody. I am Mary from Mary's Heirloom Seeds signing off. I'm going to get in the garden and start planting. So thanks for joining me, and happy planting to you on this beautiful Saturday.